All right, we're live. Thanks for joining. It's Tuesday night. We're glad you're with us. If you're even joining after the fact, as always, we're genuinely glad you're joining. Tonight we are talking about Jesus, and this is more driven by a comment that Pastor Ford made last week when he was totally ripping the religious show, The Chosen. And he was talking about how Jesus was acting. And so I
wouldn't say ripping.
You were ripping it pretty bad, actually. I think you actually said the words, worst show I've ever seen or something like that. All right. We should tag The Chosen cast in this or something. Anyway, and I mentioned that I would do a podcast because I got inspired from some of the stuff you were saying. And as I said last week, this is not going to be a podcast on The Chosen. The point is not to just rip them or what they're doing. But you did make an interesting comment. You talked about how Jesus was acting in the show and basically, joking around. And you said the words, acting like he's not the Son of God. And that is actually what inspired this topic. And the title is, was Jesus even human? And I thought that would be a relevant topic, mainly because when you read the scriptures about Jesus, specifically the accounts, not necessarily the prophecies, but specifically Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, where they actually talk about the things Jesus did and who he was and how he acted, things he said.
Sure, we're live.
I'm not sure, actually. Let me check here. Yeah, no, we're live.
Pause.
We're there.
Okay.
I have really slow internet, so it's. I think it's just because of our specific location in relation to the wireless. But yeah. Anyway, so when you read those accounts about Jesus, you don't necessarily read a lot about the type of personality Jesus had. At least it's not spelled out. Yeah. And so when it comes to this issue of Jesus' personality, right? Just the type of guy he was. I'm saying it like that on purpose, like you're not able to necessarily read the scriptures and see a description of that specifically. And so a lot is left to the imagination of the reader. And the problem with that is that is always going to be subject to the one who is imagining it, which means we are seeing it through our own experience, our own predisposition, our own opinions. And I believe there's obviously a revelation that can come, but I think that it's interesting to think about from the standpoint of how people project Jesus to be in their own minds, right? Now they try to describe Jesus, whether it's in a show or in a play or in a painting, right? They describe Jesus in a certain imagination.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where we can get into dangerous ground, because when we imagine Jesus to be what we want him to be, we can often miss who he actually was. And so on the other side of that, if we overthink the type of person that Jesus was, and the reason why I say that is because you made the statement that acting like he wasn't the Son of God. And the question came up in my mind, well, then how did he act?
Yeah.
And truly, first off, why does it matter how he acted? Because we know the scriptures actually do tell us that he was tempted in all ways like men, but he did not sin, or yet without sin, which means we know Jesus didn't act sinful. And so, where do we draw that line? Because Jesus also said that the things I do, or I've left you an example that you would do also unto others as I've done unto you. And so Jesus clearly set this pattern that he expected his followers to follow. And so, if we do think of Jesus in such a way that he's more than human, he's something beyond human.
Well, that's why I said he didn't act, the idea of acting like the Son of God, because that's a distinction separate from God or human.
Okay.
That was on purpose, saying it that way, because he was human in every sense of the term. That's why I didn't say that he was acting human, or not, acting like God. It wasn't. That wasn't the idea of the thought that was in my mind, because we have documented, how Jesus acted. We have 4 gospel accounts.
Right.
And there's plenty of interactions to see the challenges that Jesus faced in conflicts and in, casual situations,
Give me an example of a casual situation.
Well, when Jesus first he's baptized, and then I think it's the next day, John and another disciple and John the Baptist are together. No, sorry, Andrew and another disciple, probably John, and John the Baptist, are together, and John said, "Behold the Lamb of God." And so John was a really spiritual guy. He's no nonsense spiritual guy. He's like always spiritual, John the Baptist. Mm-hmm. And so, "Behold the Lamb of God," that takes away the sin of the world, and so they start following him, and Jesus turns around and says, "What are you doing?"
Yeah.
But it's a very interesting, or what do you want? Basically is what he's saying. What do you want? And they say, "Where are you staying?" Which I think is funny, because it almost sounds like it's a nervous question. It's like, oh crap, he's talking to us.
Where do you live?
And so it's like, we're following you, but how long are we going to be walking? I don't know. I don't know what was going on in their mind, but but Jesus responds to that. Come and see. It wasn't a thing of, he didn't act overly spiritual, but it wasn't a over familiarity either. That's the thing that for me is the real struggle, with the caricatures of Jesus. I thought the Passion of the Christ did a great job, that which is probably why so many people hated it, because it was very, very authentic, and held to the scriptures. And, because who he was as a person, is important, because he's an example of how we're supposed to be, but when you, and that's what I feel The Chosen tried to do, was to try too hard to try to communicate the humanity of Jesus, absent of the fact that this is a person who has perfect character. So he's not just human, and he's not just this casual, guy who, is able to do miracles. There's character. Pristine, perfect, flawless character. And so you have to include that. You can't include some of the attributes, being trivial, or being I don't know what word I want to use to describe it, but basically that he was the perfect human. That's the important thing, is that he was the perfect human. So none of us compares to Jesus from that standpoint. He was the perfect human. But what does that mean? What that means is all of the character attributes that we're aspiring to, Jesus has perfected, and they should be in him. Mm-hmm. He should know when to be firm, and when to be forgiving, and so all those different attributes, always, never once did it wrong, and so that's I think the thing that it's the a lot of movies, you try to either make Jesus like the original Jesus movie. They pick a guy that's got massive blue eyes, and it's like, why did you pick a guy who's obviously very different? Why didn't you pick somebody that was the same? And I remember hearing, I can't remember what the movie was, but it was a Jesus movie that they're looking for a character to play Jesus, and then they start looking around for another character to play Judas, and it ends up being that the guy who played Jesus could have played Judas. Something about that. I don't know how much true the story was, but the idea was,
This might be the painting.
Well, it was it was for a painting. Yeah. I think it was for a painting or something. Yeah. And so, but the idea of this is it goes too far, in trying to erase, who Jesus was in order to make him human, because for him to be human is not to be a flawed human like we are. And so he's going to be a one of a kind. He's not going to be like anybody else as a human.
So let me interject a question here, because that's you're talking about something I think people do, not necessarily it's something that, well, as it comes naturally to probably many to bring Jesus down to their level, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they're, they want a Jesus they can relate to more. And so why is that flawed or accurate? What is the thinking behind that?
Because we shouldn't be able to relate to Jesus, in from the standpoint of like he's just one of the guys. Mm-hmm. That should not be the case. Not that he is unapproachable or that he makes us feel, small, or insignificant or any of those kinds of things, because again, he's the perfect human. So take all the attributes of being a human, but the perfect human, not the flawed versions of things, and then you have Jesus, and so there's going to be an intimidation. I know when I'm around people that have got their act together, there's a measure of intimidation. It's just it's a natural thing. It's like, wow, this guy, really knows what he's doing. It's like, there's a natural respect that you have for people like that. And so there should be, you see it with the disciples, it's funny because the disciples, you get the feeling that the disciples are like kids when they're with Jesus.
Yeah. Yes. I know exactly what you mean by that.
and so they're, they respect him, but they're a lower level, they're a lower level, and their interactions with him are lower level. He's just more like a dad than a a peer.
Yeah.
And so, but not in a way, like I said, they're not intimidated. They're asking questions. Who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom of God type questions. James and John come and want, I want to sit on your left hand and your right hand in glory. So Jesus he wasn't unapproachable. And he didn't make them feel stupid. But at the same time, there's a, like I said, almost a childlike behavior from the disciples when they're around Jesus. And, though even Peter, though all others will forsake you, I will never forsake you. This exclamation of loyalty to Jesus, it's like leader, genuine, leader type, relationship that Peter has with him. And so again, the whole idea is the perfect human being, pristine, sterling character, no flaws, no, in any way, not overbearing and not timid, and I mean, all over, you take all the attributes and put them all together, all the things, and that's what we're supposed to be like, and that's why it's necessary. So going back to your question about why do we do that, is because we don't want somebody like that, to be our reference point. Because I was thinking about this earlier. How many people, because I'm trying to put all this stuff together, and I could have cut a million corners, to try to get to make the podcast easier, but I'm trying to do it the same way that we've always done it in a building, but trying to set it up like that every time is much more complicated. And as I was putting this together, I thought, I'm sure that if I was with other people, who were watching me go through this all the time, they would say, why don't you just compromise? Why don't you just set one camera up, one microphone, and just forget it? Don't worry about backgrounds, don't matter about aesthetics, don't worry about any of those things. Just get in front of a camera, use your phone, and just set it up and just do it, and put together this slipshod piece of mess. Most people are happy with that kind of life. They're doing shoddy work is, as long as I get paid for it, I don't care, and I, because as I was thinking about this, I thought, I said, I'm thinking to myself, how would I respond to that? Because anything that I would say would sound just like pride or ego. But the thought that came into my mind is what David said: I will not offer to God that which costs me nothing. That's supposed to be our attitude. And Jesus represented that. He represented the ultimate cost. He paid the price by living the way that he lived, doing the things that he did, was all to please the Father. It was his life as an offering, not just his crucifixion, but his entire life, from a young boy even all the way up. Did you not know I must be about my Father's business? His whole life was to be the perfect sacrifice, to glorify God with his life. And that should be how every person lives. Every person should live with that idea and that understanding that I want to be the perfect example. I want to be the perfect light for God in the earth. And I was having lunch with somebody today, Catalan. He works at Facebook, and so I was talking to him, and we were just talking about different things, and just thinking about these ideas and thinking, I when I look at my life and I look at being in the Bay Area, it was like that was the way I started my salvation, because my thinking in salvation right from the beginning was, you have this sort of religious thing, which is unattractive and powerless and meaningless to most people. And then you have the truth, of God, who came down to the earth, died on the cross to give us eternal life. So you have this big gap in between. You have these people that represent him they're really doing a terrible job. And then you have these other people, or you have God himself, and what God did in the whole first century of this example for us. And it's like, how do we bring these two things together? And especially in the Bay Area, because this has no meaning whatsoever. As I'm mentioning to Catalan, I said, there are people everywhere. There are hundreds of people on the campus, right? The Facebook campus. Mm-hmm. And I said, how many of them do you think are really Christians? There's probably hardly any of them. There's probably, there'll be believers, but as far as actually being a genuine, born again Christian, very few. Very few. Why? Because it's unattractive isn't the word that I want to use. It's too hard. It's too hard. It would mean living a life that's just very, very hard. And so no, I'm not going to do that. I'll choose to just believe, and just leave it at that, and I'll just be whoever I am, every day, and if I'm productive, I'm productive. If I'm not productive, I'm not productive. But I'll be what I want to be, and whatever I want to put into it. I'm not going to put any more in it. No sense of obligation, no sense. And that was the word that I used in talking to him. I mentioned that, there's an obligation we have because of how Jesus lived. I think, that is, I talk about the magic Jesus all the time, and how Jesus just waves his magic wand and just makes everything work. And then we just watch the show. We're sitting there with a bag of popcorn and, just watching Jesus do his work, but that's not Christianity. Christianity is actually doing what Jesus did, and doing it the way he did it, and doing it with the kind of impact that he had. And there should be a measure of frustration, personal frustration that we're not having, strong impact. When that isn't happening, there should be something inside of us that says, God, what do I need to do differently? What do I need to do more of, or different, or whatever, so that I can be have more impact, so that I can have more influence. And so I think that, we don't want that. When it comes right down to it, we don't want that. We want to play. We want to work, and we want to, get paid, Catalan said to me today, one of his managers said, working really is trading your time for money, when it comes right down to it, for every job, because at the end of the day, you're really not producing something. You're helping to produce something, and whether it's having a good impact on the world or not is, that's debatable. No matter what job it is, no matter who you work for.
Yeah.
But when it comes to Christianity, it should get our very best, and it should start with character, building strong character, and then out of that strong character, being able to have influence, because, people should be saying, you're not like other people. You don't do the kinds of things other people do when they engage with you, like they did with Jesus. Who is this man? They're no. I've never heard a man speak like this before. Even the guards. They were like, Jesus isn't an ordinary man. They even trying to arrest him was hard for them, because they were commanded, and that was their responsibility to arrest him.
Yeah.
But it was like, no man ever spoke like this. It's hard to do. It's hard to arrest a man who was amazing. And so. That's how we are supposed to be. That should be how people see us.
So when you think about this idea of comparing yourself to Jesus and all that includes, both the conviction or avoidance or the aspiration, right? That it can cause in a person. Why is it that, because there's scriptures, like one that came to mind in James. He says, he's talking about Elijah, who's another very prominent person in the Bible who did some pretty incredible things. And there's this idea that he says Elijah was a man just like us, or another translation says a human being just like us. Yeah. He prayed earnestly that it would rain. It did not rain on the land for 3.5 years. He prayed again. The heavens gave rain and yielded its crops. And so it's almost like it's like an encouragement, right? It's like this, listen, Elijah and all the great things he did was a man just like you.
Yes.
Why does scriptures like that exist? Jesus actually said things similar to that, not necessarily in comparisons to himself, but greater things will you do in my name, right? Yeah. Stuff like that. So he makes these statements like it's not like this. He didn't state himself as being above is not the right word, because he was, and he clearly said a servant is not greater than his master. But then he goes on to say right after that, it is good enough that his servant should be like his master. And so it's like he's trying to pull people up to this different level of living, one that he's exemplifying. And so my question is in relation to what the one I just asked is, how come, why is it not encouraging? Why does that not encourage more people to want to be like Jesus? Jesus is literally saying, you can do the things I'm doing. Yeah. Why is it so discouraging to so many people?
Well, it's a level of commitment that is beyond, because it's selfless. I mean, if you think about it, that's what it comes down to. It's a selfless existence, and that isn't conducive, to human nature. We're fallen humanity. I mean, we are by nature fallen, so it's a little different what we're dealing with, because we are not. Jesus was born of the flesh, physically, but he did not have the sin nature that we have, and so that's the difference. He was tempted, but without sin, because he doesn't, this gets into a realm that you have to be careful with, because it's not the idea that Jesus was incapable of sin. It was that he was free from the flesh, which is something that we're not, but not because of the decisions we have made. We have given in to the flesh. We have adopted the flesh is really what it is. That's why. So the whole idea, it's funny, all these thoughts are going through my mind. I think, oh my word, how do you put these puzzle pieces together simply and easily? Because the idea of us, we have a sinful flesh that there's a remedy, because Jesus died on the cross, there's a remedy. His blood has covered our sin. We're forgiven, and we've also obtained a new nature. We have a new nature, spirit. And that's the scriptures talk about that, is the idea of the spirit. And so it makes you a different person when you're led by the spirit rather than led by the flesh. You're a different person, and being led by the flesh is being led by your lower nature. So we have the opportunity through what Jesus did on the cross to adopt, or be adopted, I should say, into a new life. This is for me as a pastor is very. It's a real struggle, because there are people that are in the church that they are still walking in the flesh. They're not interested in the spirit, but yet they claim to be Christians. But it's like, that's like Christianity 101, to understand that about the walking in the spirit, is they're stuck in Romans chapter 7. And they never make it to Romans chapter 8, because Romans chapter 7, Paul talks about the good that I would do, I can't, because there's a law at work inside of me, and who's going to deliver me from this flesh, and then chapter 8 says therefore there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ. And so he's talking about the condemnation, which is in chapter 7, which is the guilt that we carry because of our sinful nature, and we are condemned already. But in chapter 8, we've been made free by Jesus Christ. And so chapter 8 is all about how we're free now. We don't have to be slaves to the flesh anymore. We don't have to live that way anymore. We can live free from that. And that doesn't have to be our go-to anymore in the born-again experience. But if you embrace that idea, then you have no excuse for bad behavior. And that's the problem, is that we still want to be able to behave badly. It's still our desire to behave badly. We want to, and that's the key, is we want to sin. We want to, have attitudes. We want to not like certain people. We want to be disrespectful of certain people. We want to be lazy. All those negative attributes that the Bible talks about. We want those things in our lives. We want them. And so, but as a Christian, you should be free from that. That's why I said the struggle for me, always backwards and forwards, is how do I treat somebody who I know really doesn't want to be a Christian, but they come to church, they're faithful, coming to church, they give, they're involved, they participate in things, they're active, but you can tell they don't, as far as being a real Christian, a genuine Christ figure on the earth, they don't want to be that. And it's like, I don't know, how do I interact with them? Because in my mind, I'm thinking, you're pretending. You're pretending, and when you stand before God, this is all going to come out, and it's not going to go well. But you seem to be under the impression that this is going to be okay, that God's okay with carnal Christians. And so it's a struggle, it's a real struggle, because, we going back to where we started in the beginning, is we want there to be a Jesus who's like us, the old song, what if Jesus was one of us, just a slob like one of us?
Oh, I remember that song. Okay.
What if God was one of us?
One of God was, yeah.
What if God was one of us? Just a slob like one of us.
Yeah.
I mean, that's fairly insightful when you think about it. Even though it's not a Christian song, it's very insightful that compared to God, we are slobs. It's it's not being normal like one of us. It's being a slob. That the reference of normal is God, not us, which is interesting. For, like I said, it's a non-Christian song.
Okay. You just brought up something else that I was kind of jotting a couple notes to bring up, but you expounded on it, which just increased the question. And my wife and I were on a walk the other night, and actually, I think it was last night. It might have been last night. We had this conversation about just people that really the dynamic of some people coming to church hearing the gospel, hearing about God, hearing about Jesus, hearing about this idea of becoming a Christian and what we call getting saved,
Mm-hmm.
and then, but they approach it with this predetermined, I guess, mentality where it is more about everything that they think God can do for them.
Yeah.
And the idea of surrender doesn't really fit in that way of thinking.
Yeah.
And so we were talking about how, like, it seems worthwhile to really question the motives of any individual. Interesting that you brought up in the very beginning, Jesus' casual moment with the disciples when he's walking and they start following him. The first question he asks is, "What do you seek?"
Yeah.
And they say, "Where do you live?" It's like it's an interesting question from Jesus' perspective, from Jesus' point of view. It's like first question before we go any further.
Yeah.
What do you want?
Yeah.
What is it
Yeah.
you actually want? And it's like before you can go any further with Jesus, you really do have to like answer that
absolutely.
question, right?
Yeah.
And so the question, I guess, is why is there a we were going to talk about this, just to take it a step further, is even people who are Christians that constantly run into conflicts.
Yeah.
And often well, I should say almost always, it's a conflict of things not going the way they want. So again, it's a conflict of what they want, what they desire. This isn't going the way I want it to go. And so and there's, however they express their, outburst or whatever, their crash out, where the term's being used a lot these days. And so it's like, it's both in the initial stages of becoming a Christian, but also even down the road, you've been a Christian, you've been a believer, and you still struggle with this idea of what you want.
Yes.
And so, you're talking about this from the idea of here we should be aspiring to be like Jesus,
Yes.
right? That
Yeah.
should be the
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah.
But the conflict of desire and between desire and surrender is such a reality that a lot of people either don't make it or don't even ever start. They don't even ever start off on the right road. And so, how do you? This is going to be a stupid question, but only because the word should state the obvious. But what is so difficult about surrender, and why do we have how come surrender is not an easy thing?
Well, that's the mystery to me, because surrender isn't easy because we want. You don't put anything beyond that. We want. We're want people. We want. There are things we want, and as a Christian, once you get so there's a couple of thoughts that are going on in my mind having to do with this. That because when you become a Christian, hopefully, if you really became a Christian, the first sort of revelation is that this life isn't all there is. And to me, that was a big deal, because that was that's what motivated me to pursue after the possibility of God, was because I had already decided that question was unanswerable. There was no meaning to life. There was no purpose. There was no point. By the time I was 20 years old, it was like, there's no point to life. We're going to all die one day. Whatever we do, we're going to pass on to others, and we may leave a legacy. But, leaving a legacy, the reality is, it doesn't last more than 2 generations. Whatever your legacy is, we keep things alive. Like we talk about beginnings. The beginning of the United States and who was all involved, and we teach the history of that. And we keep that involved. But none of us knows what George Washington was. Don't even care. And the only people that care are people who are interested in character and are interested in historical figures and their character, which isn't like a lot of people.
No.
And so Test 1 2.
That was an OBS thing, huh?
Yes.
Cool.
OBS crashed.
Love OBS sometimes.
Was that yeah. Okay, so
Stay
we're
live.
back on
All right.
again.
Yeah, we
OBS
should-
crashed. This is
Should
you
be
know,
good.
I'll tell you, my hope is that we're actually having influence doing this, because this has been, every week has been getting harder and harder and harder to keep this stream going. It's quite interesting, how difficult. So I hope this is helping people. Because there's, I listen, I don't believe the devil's behind everything. I just know that I've never ever had this many technical difficulties on Tuesday in my entire life.
Yes.
Only Tuesday.
Yeah, the last couple Tuesdays have
I
been
set
pretty
up
rough.
all this equipment, had everything working to make sure that everything was working, set it all up to date, and nothing was working, and everything's crashing, and nothing is working the way that it's supposed to. And yeah, so hopefully this is helping people, and you're getting tired of the devil tormenting your life, and you want to be more like Jesus, and so that you can go out and you can cause the devil pain. That's my goal in life, is to cause the devil as much pain as possible.
Well, on that note, and in relation to what we're talking about, I'll just go ahead and jump into another question, because I don't know how much was lost in the last one.
So just keep an eye on that flickering.
Yeah.
That
No, I've
stops,
got it
then-
in my eyes here. So in relation to what we're talking about, because we talked about quite a few different dynamics when it comes to this idea of really being like Jesus, essentially is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so considering the fact that we have a sin nature, and considering the ease of just being able to make a decision and say, I'm just going to be who I am and just believe.
Yeah.
Right. Or the other side of that, and the aspiration side of that, how do you describe what is a Christian? Like in just not necessarily simple terms, but the reality of it. What is a real Christian? What is the human side of a Christian? What is the aspiration side of a Christian? What is that really supposed to look like? What did Jesus expect his followers to look like?
Well, I don't think that that's a singular definition, because we are all different. But to try to keep it general, what I will say is, whatever sphere of life that you exist in, whether it's in the Bay Area high-tech world, or in the Midwest, and whatever else, I don't know how to generalize the Midwest. It's still pretty diverse. But wherever you are, wherever you live in life, wherever you work, whatever you're involved in, the people that you're around, your life should be different from theirs. Extremely different from theirs. Not what you do, but what you are. And this, like I said, this is the thing that is the struggle for me, is that when you as a Christian are looking to just simply utilize Jesus for your personal benefit, or you're going to come up with some weird, very personalized religious approach to things that is extra biblical and turns you into a weird person before other people, you're really going the wrong direction. Your life should be an example wherever you're at, and not just an example with your words. You can say all the right stuff, but if you're not living what you're talking about, then you're just a hypocrite, and you're doing more damage, because people will just walk away and mock you, because you don't live the way that you live. You will be to them that weird guy, or that weird girl. Oh, that weird girl or that weird guy that goes to church. Yeah, they say all this weird stuff, but then they don't do anything. They don't work very well. They don't, they're not cooperative. They're whenever they feel like it, they show up. When you're that kind of a person, people just ignore you, and you become another reason why people don't want to become Christians. You actually become anti-Christian. You become the advertisement to keep people from becoming Christians, because people should look at you and they should be able to look at your life and look and say, I want my marriage to be like theirs. I want my kids to be like theirs. I want my life to be like theirs. That people should be saying that about you. They should genuinely be saying that. I wish my life was like your life. But when people are like, what, if becoming a Christian means I have to be like you, I don't want it, then that's not persecution. That's you being a bad example when it comes right down to it. Because nobody ever, said anything to Jesus or to the disciples about, I would become a Christian, but I don't want to be like you. That never happened. That never happened one time. No matter what, even when they're arrested, they're in prison. Paul's converting soldiers that are watching him as a prisoner, and because they still want what he has. Even though he's in prison because of it, they understand the dynamics of that. They understand that they're in prison. They're being persecuted. That Paul is being persecuted. That this is not the reason why he's going through this is because of the kind of person he is, in a good way. And that they get that, the Roman centurion looking at Jesus, watching Jesus die, and said, surely this was the Son of God.
Yeah.
Well, why? I mean, why? Because of how he handled himself in being crucified. This guy's seen all kinds of people crucified, but Jesus died differently, quite clearly. He died differently. He died in a way that he's never seen another man die on a cross. He's not begging for his life. They don't have to break his legs. He yields up his spirit. He's in control all the way to the end, and they see that, and it's like, that's supposed to be what we are. We're supposed to be that. We're supposed to be that kind of people. And you say, oh, that's impossible. It's impossible to be like that. No, it's not. It's not impossible to be like that, because we are, we are, as believers in Jesus, as followers of Jesus, our lives are progressive, but they should be progressive. We should be getting better as time goes on. That doesn't mean we're not going to have, moments where, man, I shouldn't have done that. But the reality is that the people that you're around who are not Christians, when you're upset with yourself because you did something, they're like, what? That's not even a big deal, But if you're doing things that they look at and go, yeah, you really blew it there. Oh yeah, I know, I'm still working on it. Yeah, I understand. No, you've blown it. You've blown it big time. You are carnal. You are worldly. Because our faults and our flaws, especially the older we get as believers, should become things that only we recognize, or maybe other Christians recognize, not that other people recognize. Because the flaws should be things like the difference between good and great, not bad and good. And so there should be. And so, but you have to have the nature of Jesus, which is why Jesus couldn't possibly have been an ordinary man, and flawed, like we are, because there would be nothing to adopt, nothing to put on that would make us different. But that is Christianity. Christianity, as you are different. You are different. That doesn't mean it's not hard. It doesn't mean that it's not something that you have to work at doing. It just simply means that this is the way things are, and it needs to be the case. So,
what did Jesus expect his disciples to do? Like I'm not
to be like him.
But I mean, so like, I guess the question is like, because you mentioned like in whatever sphere you're in, whatever is your influence or locate or whatever.
Yeah, because you're not meant to be, so like, for me, I have a technical background, so I could work. I was thinking about it while I was there today. I could work at a place like Facebook and be a good, a good witness for Jesus, because I can speak the speak, I can talk the talk with them, where somebody else who doesn't have a technical background, they might be able to talk about Jesus, but to be able to do it in an identifiable way is going to be more difficult, because it's like, well, what do you know? What do you understand? Will be the kind of the first question for somebody of that that kind of person. And it's not, it's, this is Christianity. You know what I'm talking? I'm thinking about this. Oh, there are people, oh no, just tell them about Jesus. Just tell them about Jesus. And it's like, that's magic Jesus talk again. Just say things, and then people will, the Holy Spirit will just make it come real in their lives. No, there has to be some connection. You have to make a connection with people. You have to connect, and you have to understand. The Bible says that Jesus was in all points tempted like as we are. But without sin. But then it also says we have a high priest who is not without sympathy. He can sympathize with us. He can identify because he's gone through the temptations. He knows what that's like. Even though he didn't sin, he knows what it's like to be tempted. And so he can identify and he can be sympathetic. But it's more than just, oh, I understand, oh, it's hard. Yeah, I get it. No, it's the idea of being able to identify, with the struggles of our particular arenas of life, working at some place. So like you're working at Walmart. If you're, and I'm not dissing that, I'm just saying as an example, you're working at Walmart, you're really not getting up in the morning and mentally preparing, for that, in your mind, you're not getting there going, okay, today, this or that, you might be running a cash register or stocking shelves or, helping customers or things like that. And it's not that these are, stupid jobs. That's not the point that I'm trying to make. It's just, it's not a high demand job. But if you're working as an engineer, then I mean, there's pressure on you to deal with problems and get solutions. And and when things don't work, it's not like you can just ask somebody. You have to be able to dig down and find the answers to things. And so that's a different level of character, that and being able to bring the gospel into that environment for a non-engineer person is more difficult. That doesn't mean you can't have in a casual situation. It doesn't mean you can't have a conversation. But I found personally, like when we are in the city center and I start to have a conversation with somebody, and they get this look on their face that, listen, you know what? I'm not a dumb, earthling like you are. I'm worth something. I'm valuable. I work for a high-tech company and I make, 6 figures and you probably don't even count that high, and that's their thinking, because you're a Christian, obviously. But the number of times that the conversation has started that way and they've said, oh, I don't really, like to talk about this. And oh, well, why not? Oh, but listen, it's just really complicated. And it's like, you're just too stupid. It's really complicated to, well, try me, because are you trying to tell me that you're an atheist or you believe in evolution or what? And usually, yeah. Okay. I'm an evolutionist. Okay. All right. Well, let's talk about that then, because, and I'll start to tell them what I know about evolution and the things that, and there's a surprise. They're like, well, this stuff. You actually have heard of this stuff. Being a Christian, I wouldn't have thought you would have ever heard of this. And that's often, a response that I get. And it's interesting the number of times that the conversation has not ended with them, what must I do to be saved? But it's ended with, you know what? I have never heard it this way before. I've never heard somebody of your caliber talk about like this. And so when I say of your caliber, I mean being a Christian, being full on saved, Christian. But at the same time, I can fit that into a complicated universe. It's just, I don't have to have a simple universe in order to have a Jesus. I can have a very complex and complicated universe and still have a Jesus in it. And that's a frame of thinking that a lot of people don't really have, is being the ability to be able to do that, to be able to take and recognize the complexities of life and be able to mix Jesus into that in a rational manner. And so that's what I'm talking about. Wherever you are in life, wherever your situation is in life, being able to be proficient. I was going to say to be the best, but it's not so much being the best, but to be proficient, to be able to mix in that environment and be at the top, you recognized, like when I worked at, before I became a pastor, I was working at a company and I was getting promoted, while I was at that company. But at the same time, I was witnessing to everybody along the way. So as I'm being promoted and I'm going up the ladder of, the corporate success, I'm also bringing Jesus along with that. And I don't mean physically, I mean the conversations, nothing. It's not, I don't have to compromise my relationship with Jesus in order to achieve those things. In fact, it was quite enjoyable because I could make it look easier than it really was. Like the man who, the Roman soldier who says to Paul, he asks him, he says, is it lawful for you to punish a Roman uncharged? And so he's freaking out. So he gets his superior, and his superior comes and he says, with a great sum, I paid to be a Roman citizen. Well, he's believing in the Jewish Jesus, so he's obviously, how did you become a Roman citizen? And he says, I was freeborn, and it's like, whoa, wait a minute. You're not just one of those ragtag Jerusalem guys, that just believes in God, and just lives in Israel, and so it brought a whole nother dimension to Paul, which was probably why he was, even though he fought against it many times, it's probably why he was the apostle to the Gentiles. Is because he had an understanding, even though he was Jewish and even though he was of the tribe of Israel and Benjamin, and a Pharisee, and he had all these credentials. He also had Gentile credentials as well, and so it's very interesting.
Let me interject a question here. We're at 5 minutes till, but I think this is a good question to close on, and you can answer it with the same answers. Two questions with the same answer. Is when do, because you mentioned being one of those weird believers. when do believers cross the line into weird? And then what does it mean to be able to relate to people but still be different?
Well, weird is when you have abandoned the world that you live in. That's what you become weird. By definition, that's you can't otherwise. So when you become a monk or a nun, or something like that, you become weird. You just do. Because you're all day long. You're living this this austere life, and your daily routine is not. It's not even earthly. It's not. It's this weird. You're just waking up in the morning to decide what you're going to sacrifice today. What you're not going to do today. It's like, what am I not going to do today, rather than what am I going to do today? It's like, what am I not going to do today? And so it becomes weird. So you go into your job. You're not going to talk to anybody because of they're icky. The icky, non-religious people, those worldly people, those icky worldly people. So you're not going to talk to them. You have nothing in common with these icky, unspiritual people. You become weird. That's just all there is to it. You just become weird. You're the guy who, the high school, the guy in the high school that's on the chess team. You're the chess team, not just plays chess. It's like, there's like three of you. You're that. It's just like, whatever you are, even if there's something good about it, I don't really care. I remember there was a guy, he was weird. And all the way around. And I learned later on after high school that he'd actually got an acceptance to a really prominent university and got a this really lofty degree, and it's like, it's like, cool, yeah, of course he did, because he's weird. So it didn't rationalize or justify. It didn't justify his behavior. It was like, well, of course you got a really high degree because you don't do anything else. You graduate at the top of your class and stuff, like, not because you work really, really hard to do that. It's because you're really, really weird, and it's easy for you to do those kinds of things, you know. And so Christians can be like that, where they find it very, very easy to do things that other people find difficult. But it's because they've abandoned everything else. They don't do anything. You know, they're not doing anything but just, you know, being what they think is a Christian, you know, which isn't at all. You know, they pray, they read their Bible, they're listening to audiobooks, audio Bible, you know, they're walking into the bathroom, you know, praying to themselves, you know, and standing in the stall, oh God, peeing in the toilet, you know, it's just weird stuff. I mean, just weird, you know. They're just, you know, and not realizing that there are other people on this planet that see this stuff as being bizarre, you know, and not acknowledging that, you know. And so that's when you have crossed overs, when you just stop paying attention to the fact that you are still very much a part of this planet, you know. And you may not think so. You may think that you have, you know, it's Father, Son, Holy Spirit in you. You know, you might have come to that conclusion, but it's not. You know, you're still a slob like the rest of us.
Yeah. All right. Let me ask this last question. We're at 8:00, but I wanted this to be part of the answers. What does it mean to be able to relate to people but still be different?
Well, yeah, I mean, because so for me,
we are kind of summing up everything you've just talked about.
Yeah. So for me, when I became a Christian, that was the attraction to Christianity, was that these people were not like me, but they understood me. And as I the more that I went to the church, I realized that the reason why I understood me was because they were like me at a earlier period in their lives. So they had come out of what I was. So they could identify with me. So they had been in the world and of the world and had come out of the world, but hadn't lost touch with it. And that is what we're talking about, is that understanding. I can go into a place, you know, and strike up a conversation with people and talk about whatever they're talking about, you know, short of sports statistics. But even that, and I won't pretend to do that, but even that, I can share what little I know about that. But that is not something that happened after becoming a Christian. It wasn't like I became a Christian and I said, oh, I don't want to have anything to do with sports anymore because that's worldly. It's not that kind of a thing. I'm more of a tech kind of a person, and so that's more my realm, is more the tech side of things, of life, than the athletic side of life. But that doesn't mean that I don't like watching, you know, FIFA, and that I do know when the Olympics are held, and I know the Olympic sports, you know, the various Olympic things that are going on, and I keep a loose track on how well we're doing when, you know, in the Olympics, and mostly the summer, not the winter, but I'm connected. And my point being is that I'm still a part. I'm still supposed to be a part of this world. You know, and I say that on purpose because that is the problem, is that many people think that when you become a Christian, you're supposed to detach from the world. But you're not supposed to detach from the world. You're supposed to detach from being worldly or carnal or fleshly, you know, which is, you know, the system that we lived by without God, you know, not with God. I mean, God is the one who created technology, you know, God is the one who's given us athletic ability. You know, they're not things, you know, like the classic, you know, Chariots of Fire, Eric Liddell,
Yeah.
You know, when I run, I feel his pleasure, you know, so he understands, you know, but yet bagged all that to go be a missionary to China and ended up, you know, being martyred, you know, but he was still connected to the planet. You know, and that's that's so critical as Christians, that we stay connected to the planet so that we can have impact and influence on other people. You can't do that otherwise.
Very cool. All right. Well, we've established that Jesus was human, but
In the best sense of the
in
term.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. That's it for tonight. We will stop there and appreciate everyone joining. We will be here again next week, and who knows? Maybe we will.
Maybe
be
we'll
back
even
in
be
the
able to.
cafe.
Maybe we'll even be able to do an actual live stream that works.
Thanks for joining. Take a look. We are in transition.
No, we're not.
Yes, we are.
We are in a new dimension of existence.
Yes, we are.
And that's where we are.
But we are not located in a single building, and so pay attention to our YouTube page and stuff like that, and
our website specifically. Yeah, that's I'm going to be communicating. The vast majority of our communications are going to be through the website with little bits and pieces on the YouTube page. But it's really going to have to be, the focal point.
Yeah.
Is the website.
We'd love to have you come and
Fellowship.
join. Either way, you can check out our times and stuff like that, and our resources on YouTube. But as always, thanks for joining, and we'll be here again next week.